I'm a discoverer. I just seek to know why. Whenever I feel stuck about something, I think I try to say to myself, stay curious. What's motivating this person? What's motivating this issue? What can you learn? How do you dig deeper? So I think a passion for learning is how I stay curious. Congratulations to IdeaFestival. I think this idea of tapping in to all the disparate parts of Louisville, of the greater community, that I think to stay curious, it really is about connecting the dots. And what I love that you guys have done here is you've taken these very different themes and ideas, and I think someone comes away from here with whole new insights. And that's what I believe is a very important role in business, in society, is those who can connect the dots, can see themes from disparate parts, and I think IdeaFestival seems like a great place to do that. When Chris invited me here, one of the things that really got me going was he said, talk about some big ideas that you see. What are you thinking about? What's your company thinking about? So I went right to kind of two converging ideas that I am particularly passionate about and thought I would spend some time on that. And to do that, I thought I'd ask you to think a little bit about how things are made. Maybe some of you stop and think about how we make the things that intersect in our world. Maybe some of you give it absolutely no thought. But in a company like mine in GE, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make things, and we spend even more time doing it. It's what we've done for 130 years. And to set the stage, let me take you back 130 plus years to a guy who helped start what became our company. Thomas Edison was one of the early, sort of a great inventor, but one of the early founders of GE. I like to refer to him as the Steve Jobs of his time, for those of you who can't remember what Thomas Edison did. But he didn't really invent the light bulb, as we know, despite what our history books in school might have told us. In fact, the invention of the light bulb was done over many generations. It was done by a series of inspired tinkerers. And it took about a century. And what Edison and his team did is they came in, and at the end of the process, they figured out how to standardize. And I think this next point's really important. They figured out how to commercialize the invention that became the light bulb. There was a lot of experimentation and tons of failure. We all know all those great Edison quotes about failing and perspiration and inspiration. It was labor intensive. In sort of doing the research for today, I was surprised to learn that if you just went through the filament in the light bulb, that Edison went through 6,000 different plants to come up with the carbonized bamboo that became the first filament of choice. So he kind of had this great idea for a product, and what's most significant is that he figured out how to bring it to market and how to scale it. So it was this profound invention. It's changed life as we know it. The next sleepless night you have because you've been on your computer and you've been energized by light, you can thank Thomas Edison. But it was imperfect in the early days, and that's part of the innovator's challenge. It gave off a lot of heat. It didn't have as much light as it had heat. And like any mass-produced item, there were a lot of raw materials that had to be gathered. There was centralized manufacturing that had to be created, and the product had to be shipped wherever it was needed. So if you think about the light bulb as one of the most disruptive inventions of its time, but it took decades for the impact to happen. We're used to getting our iPhone and in 5 years going, wow, how did I live without the App Store? This took decades. So if you think about it, it was an idea that spread at a virtual crawl. Getting light and electricity around the world was a big part of the challenge, and you think about it, it still is. We still have many parts of the world where we don't have the completion of that project. So you think about that 130 plus years of making something. The light bulb is our kind of universal symbol of a good idea. Is it any different today how we make things? Well, sure. I mean, a lot's changed. But the point I'm going to make to you today is that what we've seen change is nothing to what we're going to see. So if you think about hardware, I'm going to break it down. You talk about hardware. We saw some amazing improvements in the 20th and 21st century. I mean, a lot happened out of the Industrial Revolution. We made things today that are just critical to our life, and it's all built around things that are smaller, more energy efficient. We can fit more onto a transistor circuit. From Moore's law, things get faster, cheaper, smaller. Materials become stronger. They're more resilient. We can do more with them. supply chains, inventories, have all kinds of flexibility, and we've improved them to the point that you can do just-in-time almost anything, just-in-time delivery, just-in-time manufacture, that makes a big multinational company as nimble as a small corner store. But hardware still has had its limitations. In Edison's day, most of the things had to be created at a central location, done at scale, in order to be cost-effective, and that still is pretty much the way things are. Tooling is very expensive. I was fortunate to spend the morning with our teams at Appliance Park, and a lot of what goes into making the great GE appliances is a lot of very complicated tooling. And you need to produce tens of thousands of things often to recoup the cost, certainly hundreds if not thousands of things. And being able to do this in a customized way, it's really hard. Then there's also software. We know how it's changed our life, certainly in the office setting. We've gotten to see how we can share information, how we've been more productive with word processors, spreadsheets. We're seeing how that's changed our lives at home, at work. It's also done it in the industrial scale, a lot of productivity, a lot of process improvement. But I want you to hang on, because I think this is where things are starting to get really exciting, is that I think we're heralding this meshing of those two worlds. So software meets hardware. And it's going to take things to some incredibly new places, and it's going to be more participatory for all of us than we ever thought possible. And I think that gets very, very exciting. So we've been dazzled by the internet revolution, which is still in its very early stages, only a couple of decades old. And what happens when the internet starts to intersect with industry, when those two revolutions come together? And so that's what gets me pretty excited, the arrival of this next industrial revolution, the meshing of the soft world and the hard world. And look, I'm not a technologist. I don't stand here before any of you with any great technology expertise. I work with tens of thousands of them at GE, and they're really smart. They're awesome with what they do. I'm a marketer. And I think hopefully if you know good marketers, you know what we live to do is figure out where the world's going, try to figure out how we can participate, bring it home, make it real, figure out what's the benefit. How are we as people going to live better because what is happening with technology? Sure, for business, there are a lot of new opportunities, economics. Customers are going to be able to behave differently. But as a marketer, I love technology from what it's going to do to change our lives, how we're going to behave differently. So let me explain it in a way that I think might be relevant. Many of us fly. I had to fly to get here. I fly all the time. Luckily, I like to travel, but sometimes even that gets a bit too much. But think about a jet engine. You don't think about it very often. You think about getting on a plane, getting someplace safely, and hopefully on time. But if you take the jet engine as sort of this metaphor, think of it as a very complicated piece of equipment. And what I'm going to tell you about is the backdrop. So jet engines over the past 50, 60, 80 years have become much more efficient. They're more powerful. They're cleaner. There are some changes that I think you may be surprised to hear about. The first is how we make them, the hardware part. The fan blades on some of these newer jet engines are made of these incredibly super strong and yet light ceramic fibers. Yes, you heard me right, ceramics. You're thinking it's like what you might have done in pottery shop. But they're fibers that are coated and fused in these really sophisticated furnaces and ways. And even more exciting is we're starting to print parts to jet engines. So think of brackets and nozzles. We're using 3D printing in a laser-like fashion. It's something called laser metal sintering. And the process literally melts metal powder. So think of powder that's made of metal. The printer takes it layer by layer by layer. And it can create these shapes that perhaps took hours in the past to manufacture using traditional methods. And the other thing is that it can create shapes that we never thought possible. So you go back to all your geometry days and all the crazy shapes that you might have thought of creating but never could make. 3D printing is allowing us to do that. That's what we call advanced manufacturing. And it's these new technologies that are allowing us to combine materials and new processes and new geometries through software to make things that previously were unimaginable. Our research geniuses, and we have a few of them, they predict that there will be literally tens of thousands of parts of a jet engine that are printed by the year 2020. So that's not that far off. And not only will it give huge cost savings to our airlines, which desperately need cost savings. But it also is going to mean the jet engines are lighter. They're going to fly faster. They're going to save more energy. All of that's going to be good for all of us, the world and all of us. The other exciting thing that's happening is we're seeing that jet engines are starting to give us regular status updates. And before you think your jet engine's going to join Facebook, it might, but that's a concept I'd like you to think about. What if your jet engine had a status page or had a Twitter feed? That's what we've been working on. Sensors embedded in some of our biggest jet engines that fuel things like, that power things like a 747. They can analyze in one jet engine 5,000 data points per second. For every engine in a day, every engine generates 1 terabyte of data. Again, I'm not a data scientist, but I'm told that's a heck of a lot of data. And you start to think about what do you do with that data? What kind of Twitter feed would your jet engine have? It would start to say things like, hey, it's a little dusty up here. I need to come in earlier. Hey, you know what? I don't need to come in early at all. I'm good. Let me run a lot longer. And so you start to see the benefits are kind of no unplanned downtime. If you're running a business, this opportunity to get updates from your equipment that tells you what you need to do. It predicts what you need to do before it actually happens. Makes you much more productive, much more efficient for all of us. For us, it means less time sitting at a gate waiting and wondering why the plane's there or if it needs to go out of service. We call this the industrial internet. It's a new category in some respects and not in others. It's about, you think about the internet, what it's done with social networking, connecting the internet and mobile and social networking have connected 3 to 4 billion people on Earth. Well, what happens when you start to connect all the machines? By some estimates, 50 billion machines that potentially can be connected by the internet. It starts to get kind of crazy in terms of where your head goes of what's possible. Start to connect your refrigerators, drilling equipment that's under thousands of feet under the sea, jet engines high in the sky. Hopefully we're not connecting them all to each other. That seems like a bit of a mess. But the reality is the Internet of Things is here. And we're betting big time on the Internet of really big things. And then what's compelling about this is when you start to think about this industrial internet is that we're only beginning to understand the benefits from it and the business opportunities. Our economist estimates that, I think somewhat modestly, that he values the impact at somewhere between 10 and 15 trillion dollars of business impact, economic impact over the next 20 years. So that's an eye-popping figure. You almost can't get your head around that one either. But it's going to have big impact and implications in the way we live. A couple of things I want to point you to. For one, business and industry will be moving from some of these centralized making efforts we talked about that are still happening today to methods that are much more distributed. They're going to be much cheaper. When you start to think about printing a part anywhere in the world, anywhere, manufacturing can take you virtually anywhere. The industrial internet means machines, you don't have to go to machines to fix them. It means they can get a software upgrade wherever they are. They can connect seamlessly wherever they are, in the air, under the sea, in the desert, on a road somewhere. So you take this distributed concept one step further, and we start to look at how interesting partners start to connect through the digitization that's happening in our world, be they customers, be they startups, be they data geniuses in far-flung locations around the globe. And I think these are going to speed many of the industrial breakthroughs that we're also excited about. Look, as smart as the PhDs at GE and many companies like GE are, we also believe that the future, which is happening really fast, is also going to come about from the collective intelligence of communities and innovators around the world. This idea of being able to tap into a global brain, we're seeing it today. What happens when you start to apply it to industry? And thanks to digital technology, you can work with anyone virtually anywhere, which is important. Stop and think about the problems we're all trying to solve in the world today. They're so complicated. They're so complex. Energy, healthcare, transportation, access to finance. They're very complicated. No country can solve them alone. No company can solve them alone. So as we see this shift, the ability to connect into machines and people and intellect is becoming ever more important. Every year we do this barometer. We call it the Innovation Barometer. We've been doing it for about 4 years. And we go out and we poll C-level executives around the world, something like 25 different countries. And we ask them kind of what's their recipe for creativity and innovation in industry. And what I found surprising over 4 years, things change, but there are kind of 4 key themes that business leaders say is important to them. One, they say it's important to have profit if you're in business, but what's changed a lot is that it's profit with a mission, with a purpose. You have to make money that's meaningful. The second thing that you hear businesses say is that global technology, global innovation is great, but it has to be applied locally. A lot of tension in getting that right. But the last 2, I think, are very relevant to this discussion. What business leaders are struggling with is they say, we need more creative brains. We don't know how to get them. And they also admit they're a little scared by creative people. They don't know what to do with them when they show up in their office. Do they get them a special desk? Do they need a certain place, a way to work? They know they need them, but they're just kind of afraid of what to do with them. And we hear this from Saudi Arabia to Korea to America. And the last thing that they say is what I mentioned earlier, this idea that problems in industries that many of us face, the challenges are just increasingly more complicated. And we can't solve these alone. So time and again, business leaders are saying we need partnership, big company to small, academic institution, startup to big company. And so everyone's starting to look at this, and I think as the world becomes more digitized, as industry starts to connect itself, we're going to start to see some of those answers. So let me close with a few examples of what we're seeing. These are just kind of small notional proof points, haven't yet scaled, but I'm very intrigued about them as perhaps a set of ideas to set forth today. Recently, we commissioned set out a grand challenge. We've been doing a series of these open challenges to kind of test this thesis to say, where are these great ideas outside the company and how do we participate and kind of do match.com, if you will, for capabilities and ideas. So the one thing we've just wrapped up is what we're calling our 3D printing quest. And we said, hello world, we're looking to print a bracket on a jet engine. I know it probably doesn't sound very sexy, but it's really sexy to us. But it weighs a lot. It's like 100 pounds for just one of these. There are multiple of them to hold a jet engine. Trust me, you want them to work really well. And innovation has taken that geometry about as far as it could go. And it weighs a lot. And the more things weigh, the slower it makes the plane, the more fuel it needs. So we said, hello world. We teamed with a company called GrabCAD, which is an open community of designers and engineers. And we said, can you design this bracket faster, better, for lighter weight? 1,000 entries later, we got some of the most sleek, mind-blowing designs you've ever seen. They're now in our research labs being tested and validated to make sure they're production and airworthy. But what's interesting is that the top 20% of them, maybe the top 30% of them, had a minimum of 75% weight out. What's also interesting is that the winners, yeah, you might expect they were professional engineers in aerospace and aviation, but some of them were self-professed Lego enthusiasts. These are people who are just enthusiastic about design and 3D printing. Now look, we don't expect this crowdsource option to take over engineering at GE. Our engineers are safe, they do really great work. But certainly it's opening up new ways of thinking about knowing what you're good at, opening up to share intellect and ideas and solve problems together. Another challenge we've done recently is in the area of data. Again, for some reason we keep doing these around the aviation space. We created a data quest, and we teamed with one of our airlines, Alaska Air, and we together unleashed the most data in over a 30-day period, everything from weather to traffic to all kinds of things. And we said again, hello world. We teamed with a data science community called Kaggle, and we said, can you figure out a better way to crunch this data so that a plane can land more efficiently and faster? So when it navigates in, it can have a cleaner descent, it'll save fuel and save the airline money, it'll save CO2 emissions and help the world. And this has confounded the airline industry for a long time. They've had industry study, they've shaved like 2 minutes, or I mean 2 seconds off the descent time. So everybody's like, you know, whatever, let's see if we can try it. So we put out this data quest, and it was amazing what we got back, and we're now in the second wave of this. But the first wave, the winning team has taken off 9 seconds on descent, when the industry average before was the best they could get to was 2. And oh yeah, the headline on this one, I think, is the winning team so far was a team out of Singapore. And they are insurance analysts. And the second place winner is an epidemiologist out of Europe. These are not aviation navigation experts, but they're data scientists, and they love data. And they wanted to be part of a grand challenge that they think helps mankind in some better way by saving fuel and saving the environment. So I give you those as an example because it starts to make you think, wow, those are interesting opportunities. And for us, those data scientists were able to help us create predictive models that start to pinpoint what matters in terms of weather and traffic and where things are. And oftentimes data sources don't connect to one another. So our aviation partner, our airline partner, was very intrigued. And together we're now trying to take that and figure out how do you scale it to a better system. We've also partnered with startups. There's one I'm particularly fond of called Quirky. It's about making everyday invention accessible. You have an idea, you go online. What intrigued us was the ability to perhaps open up some of GE's patents. Things that are very complicated. Again, think of something that might cool a jet engine. One of our guys came up with an application that cools a laptop. Well, what if you opened those kind of patents up to everyday inventors and said, you know, we've thought through everything that we could do with it, and maybe we'll come up with something else, but maybe you have a better shot at it. Sure, we'll take a small licensing fee, but you see what you can come up with. And so I think more and more you're going to see that kind of act. I don't know where it goes, but interesting little perspectives. So let me kind of wrap this up, and we can have hopefully a really good conversation. But the thing to think about is when you have this global brain, you've got machines connected to machines, machines connected to people, people connected to each other with intellect that you never thought possible. It's about giving inventors the opportunity and the ability to move really fast and to access intellect in whole new ways. Tom Friedman has this great line. He talks about the end of average, and that this continues to raise the bar in terms of what it means for all of us. It's an embrace of the bottom up. It's improv comes to industry. I love this idea of industry improv. So let's go back for a second to wrap this up. Go back to Thomas Edison and the light bulb. Think about, you know, all the geniuses over generations that worked on perfecting this. Well, what if they could have all gotten together and said, hey, you know, okay, you got IP, you got intellectual property and some of those domain rights, but even after Edison came up with a model, what might have happened if he could have opened it up and had other geniuses that came in and started to think about how do you iterate that innovation? I think you'd start to see you could certainly speed up the progress. What took years could possibly take days, weeks, months. So you think about all the productivity and these machines that we're trying to connect. We've set our sights on if we could just go after 1% productivity, what would that mean? It doesn't sound like much, but let me just give you one example in industry. Gas-fired power plants, again, you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about them unless you work for the local utility, but 1% productivity from better understanding the data around the machines there, that could save $66 billion just in fuel consumption in the energy space. So we're talking about big kind of impacts. You think about developing worlds, countries and regions like Africa, where they've had to leapfrog technology, not the luxury of things like telephones. So they've been able to take mobile technology and leapfrog it with all kinds of innovation in mobile banking, mobile commerce. We're starting to see that same thing happen in energy and power, where energy is going to be distributed and generated away from big centers and connected to one another. So you start to think in an area like sub-Saharan Africa, what might that mean where you have power plants in remote locations and you can print parts to service them and they can ping headquarters to say, I need this or not need that. It starts to change the dynamics of access and what's possible. So what I want to end with is just hopefully this vision of what I get very excited about from a big market trend, what it means for business, what it means for all of us. It means there are going to be a lot of new skills and opportunities. It means the future of the way we work is going to change. Are you a data scientist or a manufacturer? You may well be both. Do you need to code software or wield a welding gun? You may need to know how to do both. And so very intriguing and interesting times when you think about the job opportunities and what this is going to do to engage people around the world. It may feel a bit utopian. Maybe it sounds a bit scary. We can barely talk to each other. What happens when we start to talk to our machines? But I think if you start to think about where this goes and how you start to think about the impact, it gets pretty exciting. And this idea of blended roles in work, and this idea of what productivity means, it's going to mean there's a huge need for all kinds of skills. I'm very intrigued about industrial design and man-to-machine interface, and how do we communicate more simply with our machines. These are all new skills that are going to need to come together. So ultimately, look, I think it comes down to this. We're entering some of these figure-it-out professions in kind of figure-it-out times. There are few hard and fast rules as these worlds come together, but there's amazing room for experimentation, for tapping into intellect anywhere around the world. And I'm convinced these are some of the most exciting times for business, intriguing challenges for all of us in terms of change, disruption, dislocation, new roles, new jobs. But I view it with a lot of optimism. I believe there's a lot to be excited about. We're going to see very big improvements to our lives that support our health, support how we power our lives, how we move, how we connect. And I think it's going to result in amazing outcomes. At the end of the day, it's all about the outcome. Why do you care about technology unless you get a better outcome? So hopefully it's better health, it's a better world, it's better jobs, and I'm very excited about it. So with that, I think we're going to turn to a Q&A section, and hopefully this gave you a few sparks of ideas to think about. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
You might not know me. I'm Drake Bear. I'm a contributing writer for Fast Company magazine. And I have the privilege of having my job being talking to people like Beth for a living. I think what's maybe most urgent for the people in the room here is, in fact, how, as this world is emerging, as the soft world is meeting the hard world, how do we participate in that? And especially for the college students, the Vanderbilt, Murray State students are here, high schoolers. How do we become a part of this emerging world? How do we participate in that?
Yeah, I think one, in some ways it's never been easier, because we see with a lot of these making technologies, they're being democratized, meaning because they have more open interfaces through the internet, and they're becoming cheaper too. So it means that take something like 3D printing that used to be inaccessible high-end, now you can get a 3D printer for $1,000. If you're a student, that's still expensive, I get that. Mm-hmm. But these tools are becoming much more accessible. So I think you're seeing the ability to tap into it happening. So if I were in high school again, well, actually, when I was in high school, shop was still popular. That's how old I am. But you don't get shop as much in high schools today. But I think the ability to go to maker spaces. There's a maker collective here in Louisville. Yeah. There are the emergence. I think there's something like 700 maker spaces around the U.S. Mm-hmm. And what is a maker space? It's a collective where people get together and they share making equipment, welding guns, things called CNC machines, laser cutters, and it's people who just like to tinker, who just like to make things. Things are more accessible. There's some great online resources. I don't know if anyone here would be familiar with a group called Adafruit, which is basically open source circuit boards. So you can go in and have very little knowledge of how to do that with a few bucks, and go in and figure out how to do that. So that's what I mean. I think the democratization, as these things get cheaper, people can access it more digitally. You're going to see the ability of people to have their own garages. We do this thing we call GE Garages, and we actually have it in Chicago right now. And it's basically trying to create our own little version of this to say to people, hey, you can come and play with a 3D printer, you can do laser cutting, see what you could make. And I'll just tell you one quick story. We did it, we've been doing this for about a year. It's really hands-on. It's for students. It's for anyone, really. And we had a woman who was 15 who came to one we did in Austin last year. And you could tell her dad dragged her in. She's like, oh, do I have to be here? This is like really, I don't want to be here. And her dad, for whatever reason, said, I want you to see this. And I'm sure she thought it was wonky, welding, whatever. But she came back 4 days in a row. And she said, I had no idea, one, that I had the capability to make something, and that I could design something and then make it. I'm now going to, this is my path. I want to have this. So I think you start to see that, and I think if I'm in high school, I want to expose myself to some of those tools, and it's not that hard to find. Long answer, sorry.
That's great. So essentially it's a matter of there's these trends that are emerging, and one of the side trends to that is that they're becoming more accessible. And so like here in Louisville and around Kentucky, there's progressive classrooms and these maker spaces and whatnot. So by engaging with those things, we can kind of have an entrepreneurial education. I think something sort of related to that is, you said before that your job as CMO of GE is essentially seeing where the world is going. That's amazing. How do you do that?
Well, I don't do it alone. Certainly there's a lot of, you get a lot of data sources. I think you have to live in the world. So you spend a lot of time outside, understanding, and many times unconventional kinds of places, seeing where the world's going. So for example, something we've spent a lot of time as a company doing over the past, let's say 3 to 5 years, is very much working with startups. Not just to invest in them, sometimes that's important, of course, but to partner with them, to say, hey, if you're a startup, what do you want? You want access to money to get your idea going, but you want access to a market, access to technology. So we've tried to put ourselves out there in a big way, inviting in startups to collaborate in our labs together, to get to know them, so that they can speed their idea and hopefully help us see around corners. That's one example. Other examples that we've done a lot to try to embed our teams very locally. And I'll give you a good example. I was just in Southeast Asia a few months ago where we've embedded medical technologists and marketers with midwives outside of Jakarta in Java to take ultrasound equipment and make it really simple so that you don't have to be a doctor, and it's a midwife that can go and see if this mother needs to be taken to the hospital or not. So you can't do that in a central lab somewhere. You need to be out in the market. So I think that's what we've tried to do as a company, is try to not just put marketers where the markets are, but put our engineers, our technologists, our thinkers in the market where the needs are to be solved.
Great. I think that that connects with something we were talking about before, which is how you find time for discovery and serendipity in your day. Can you tell me a little bit about how, I wouldn't think that serendipity and CMO would be so interlaced?
Well, again, I think if you were, I think you'd love for the world. Well, I don't know if I would love for the world to be logical, but in some ways, you'd like things to progress in a logical order. It just doesn't happen that way. So, I find the best insights sometimes are when you least expect them, when you least plan for them. But I think you can kind of organize it. So I'll give you some of the things we've tried to do. Like we've created an insight network of people who are very non-traditional from a GE context. And we get them together so they can feed off one another, but we learn. What do I mean by that? A roboticist, a woman who's printing tracheas with human cells and printing 3D printing of tracheas, a research scientist who's studying transportation in Africa, someone who's doing cook stoves in India. You'd seemingly think those people have nothing to do with GE or each other. But we felt it important to try to bring those folks together around big themes. Where's the world going? And so I think sometimes serendipity means just showing up in some of these places, finding out what's happening, and then sometimes you can organize it. How do you start to bring different points of view together and figure out, is there a connection point? Is there something we can learn here? And I think there often is quite a bit you can learn.
That's great. And I think it connects a little bit with yesterday's discussion of marine biologists and poets and the liberal arts and sciences all being together.
I'm a big believer, I'm a design junkie. I love design because I think design influences the way we interact with the world. There's an aesthetic, but really design is about a functional benefit. And I think more and more, I see this in our company, and I see it in other companies. Design thinking is, it's kind of a cute little phrase. What does it mean? It means, I think there's an approach that designers have to integrate different points of view, to be able to frame it and communicate it. in its simplest form. And I think business in particular is embracing more of it. We need to do more. But I think as I see us looking at machine data and all of these complicated issues, it often comes back to if you can simplify it through design, if you can have someone that's sort of framed to think simply and pull those themes together. So I would say design thinking is something that I believe is a trend you're going to see much more enter the business space as people try to make sense of these complicated worlds. And that connects, why should you have a marine biologist with a roboticist or whatever? It starts to say, where do those worlds intersect and what might we see out of that?
That's great. Something you kind of alluded to during your talk was this utopian vision. What's dystopian about this emergence of the industrial economy, the Internet of Things?
I think the Internet of Things, I mean, sometimes it's just frivolous, you know, because I can connect a piece of technology to the Internet, do I care? I mean, do I need to monitor everything I do? Some people really groove on that, some others don't, but I mean, because you can doesn't mean you have to. So I think there's sort of that issue. There are going to be security issues. I mean, already we're seeing security challenges, so you're going to need sort of industrial strength security to make sure those vital connections are connected. You've got security grids, energy infrastructure, all those kinds of things I think are going to be challenged in some respects. I think skills, I mentioned it in my talk, I think one of the things is we're going to need new skills. And my youngest daughter's in college, and my kids are in the arts, so I'm going to say something that I didn't do, but you know, if you're a parent and you're thinking, what kind of skills should I be steering my kid toward? Obviously they have to have some interest, but this idea of the physical meets the digital, and I'm seeing a lot of entrepreneurs starting to erupt in the hardware space, but they were digital first kids. They grew up in an internet age and they're attracted to hardware, but not everyone's going to have that orientation. So people who've maybe grown up in a manufacturing context aren't as comfortable with some of the digital design software capabilities. They're going to need to get that. So there's going to be a period of time when the skills may not match the need. And we've got to work in companies and governments and education systems to imbue those skills. So I think that's something that we have to face into and probably, hopefully move pretty fast to fix.
Yeah, there's a gap perhaps developing between what's needed and what skills people have available.
Well, I think so, but I think it's also maybe directing folks. Like we've invested a lot in software engineers, and we specifically went to Silicon Valley because a lot of great software engineers are there, but we also wanted to say, you know, maybe you want to take that great skill that you developed building gaming, and there's nothing wrong with gaming, but maybe you want to apply it to fuel efficiency in a jet engine. It's a different kind of a challenge. So I think it's also giving people a sense of what's possible and maybe where to direct some of those skills. It's something we've seen.
What?
Question.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
My name is Daniel Puto from DuPont Manual. According with the utopian idea, when electricity was first created, it was a revolutionary idea, but now it has kind of disappeared and gone into everything in our lives, and we don't think about it that much. Do you think that will occur with technology, how it'll be so prevalent that we won't think about it being present?
Yeah, I personally agree with your perspective. That I don't know who said this line, but I quoted a lot this idea of you take for granted the technology that was already there before you. We take electricity for granted, unless those of you who were on the East Coast during Hurricane Sandy, you were in Brooklyn, I don't know if you were affected, but without electricity, you appreciate nothing but your electricity, right? So I think there is, I think there is something really profound about what you're saying. Already we take for granted, think of your iPhone. For those of you who have an iPhone or if you have a smartphone, you didn't have an app 5 years ago. If we were sitting here 8 years ago and I said, how about that app? You'd be like, what are you talking about? You take it for granted now. It's the way you interact. So I think I don't know how to solve what you're saying, but I think that's the sign of progress, is that you build on what's come before you. But it doesn't mean that there aren't still problems to be solved. I mentioned it in my remarks. There are lots of parts of the world who still aren't electrified. That's shocking when you think about all the progress that we're making. But again, technology is speeding in such a way that they're going to have a chance and probably leapfrog like never before. So these things are coming together. So I totally agree with your point of view.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Lowe. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. My question connects with or juxtaposes some of the stuff that you talked about with one of my big takeaways from yesterday's sessions, which was about mindfulness, sort of being available and present at the current moment and connecting with other people. And when I think about the speed with which you're talking about things moving and the ability of sort of nimble reaction by big corporations moving forward really, really fast, I worry about the meaning of change, disruption, and dislocation for everyday people. And I'm wondering what you think about how we can both take advantage of the creative energy and speed that you're talking about while also remaining mindful of our common humanity.
Yeah, I love that question. I asked Drake to answer your question too, because it was like you were hearing us earlier. We were talking about being mindful in the face of this. So I think that's such a profound thought. I mean, in some ways, what I love about sort of studying trends is you start to think about the trend and the counter trend. And so I think it's not surprising that as world and technology get so much more exponential and frenetic and complex, that we're all seeking more simplicity, that we're seeking more mindfulness. We're seeking local food. We're seeking mindful eating. We want to be aware of what we're eating. Every calorie counts. So I personally believe in that trend, counter trend, those countervailing tensions and forces. And so one thing I think as things get more complex, we're just more aware of needing simplicity. I had my own little experiment. Last November, I sold my house and sold virtually everything in it and got rid of like 20 years worth of stuff. It was so terrifying and so exciting at the same time. But I got to that point where I just was like, I need a more mindful approach to how I live. And I think we all come about that in our own way. The only thing I would say from a business perspective to your question of how do all of us relate to this? We're all struggling with it. I don't care what you do, how you spend your days, we're all struggling with ongoing, incoming, these moments where sci-fi meets sci-real. And I think that this simplicity, this ability to simplify things, I come back to design, to user interface, the ability to give people a simple way to connect in, a simple way to understand. For example, we've embraced data visualization in a very big way. Data is very scary. I'm not a data person. But to visualize it into pictures, to say, hey, this is a way to understand something that's very complicated, I think you're going to see the emergence of more of that so that it makes it accessible. I mentioned that ultrasound, that a midwife, it's basically a red light, green light. Is the baby breech? Then get the mother to the hospital. So that's the kind of thing that I think is going to allow all of us to access and be more mindful with technology. I know how do you answer that? You had some good thoughts.
Well, I think what's fascinating is that there is really those two parts there, right? Like we have a tremendous amount of noise and maybe friction in our lives, which creates market opportunities. If you can create something that allows people to organize their lives really well, then there'll be a huge demand for that. We also kind of have a personal responsibility to ourselves. I think that's why now, like, yoga is as common as, I don't know, as like soccer, right? And also mindfulness is being talked about here. Like, people are developing like meditation practices. And so I think what's really fascinating is that we have this ultra contemporary trend that's being met with some of the oldest technology we have, which is just like the human breath.
It's quite interesting. And you had a comment, would you mind sharing I thought your comment about how you feel like at work you're more focused because you have been more mindful. I thought that was a really great observation.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interviewing Drake now.
Yeah, it's a reversal, which is healthy. Earlier, back there, Beth and I were talking about how we have like this intensity of quantified productivity industrially, as well as now there's this quantified self-movement developing, like the Nike Fuel Band and whatnot, tracking how many steps you have in a day.
I don't want to tell you how little I've done today.
Precisely. And she asked me, well, are you really into the quantified self stuff? And I was like, I just meditate and do yoga. I'm more of a qualified self. I think also because we're so saturated with technology that when we can find that space for mindfulness, it becomes even more potent.
Yeah, it's well said.
Hello, I'm Patrick Smalley. I'm a student at DuPont Manual. And what I hear you talking about a lot is this industrial internet revolution and sort of the way that it's going to shape society and our lives. And I hear you talking a lot about machines that communicate with each other in a way, and that communicate with us even. And I think you sort of dance around this idea of synthetic cognitivism. And what I'm wondering is, on that topic, do you believe in the kind of future where almost sentient or even semi-sentient machines fit into the society? Do you think that's a possibility? And if so, how does that fit into your vision of the future and of this utopia, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to answer that question, is what I would say. I can certainly help craft some really scary sci-fi scenarios, and you look at things like what IBM's doing with Watson, and where Watson's starting to come into hospital rooms and other things. I personally believe, and I'm not sure how my colleagues at GE if they would share this, but I personally believe at the end of the day, a machine's never going to be able to feel human emotion. A machine's never going to be able to have the kind of wisdom that experience gives you. You can write algorithms. Machines are going to help you make more informed decisions, there's no doubt. Machines are going to help you know what previously might not have been knowable, find things. But I'm a big believer, at the end of the day, we're never going to be able to replicate in a machine. And I think when we talk about the industrial machine, it's just tapping into that productivity that it's really what the internet was supposed to bring about, was this big productivity wave. And now we're going to just make machines be better. We put a lot of features on our machines and we don't use all of them. So what about if we actually use more of what we program them to do to make our lives better? That's the vision I know we're working toward. The one you're talking about, I'm not ready to buy into that one yet.
So my name is Wes Brooks. I'm a recent grad from UK's engineering program, worked on some of the GE aviation engines actually. Really exciting stuff that you guys are working on. My interest is personally in data science. And in talking with a lot of people, I work in the startup scene around Kentucky. And data science is not something that's really on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. You've talked a lot about the industrial internet and about what data science is. You mentioned Kaggle and the different competitions that you host on there with GE Healthcare and GE Aviation. How do people become data scientists? What ways is GE actually working to try to fill that skills gap, like you mentioned, actually about the need of science and art and creativity to visualize data, to create interesting and innovative ways to manipulate data, especially in an age where you have 5,000 data points coming off every second? How do you fill the skills gap? What can we do to help fill that? What can I do to learn along those lines, even in a startup sense or in general?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I think some people are going to be skilled in that area and want to write algorithms and become data scientists, but I don't believe all of us are going to have that capability. Thank goodness for me. Trust me, I can't even balance my checkbook on a good day, so that's really good news. But I think in business, every function, every kind of business is going to have to work with data. I always say on the marketing front, if you don't like data, you're not going to like the future. Because increasingly, if you're a marketer, you need to understand what your customers want. Data is just abundant. I think most of us don't necessarily always believe what your customers or your consumers tell you. They might not because they're lying to you, just because they may not even know. But the ability to see how people behave, to understand what people are doing, what they can't even say, that changes product development. It changes marketing. The ability, if you're an aviation scientist, to understand all the dimensions and see how things perform. I'm a big believer that data is going to come into all of our lives. So I think yes, there's going to be education needed in every profession. We're starting to see that. In 2 weeks, we have a conference in Chicago where we're bringing together many of our customers. And to your question, we're bringing in someone out of Kellogg, out of Northwestern, And his field of specialism, exactly what you're talking about, how do you take data and inject it into management? And his view is that managers, leaders, should not be data scientists, but they should understand what questions to ask of data scientists, what data can lead them to. And I'm a big believer, certainly from a marketing perspective, that if you don't know what question to ask, you're not going to get the right data. So that's my way of answering it. I think we all need to understand what an algorithm is, how you form what a problem is, and how you create a formula. But I'm not going to spend my time learning how to write them. I'm going to hopefully spend more of my time being more informed in understanding what questions to ask that data can help me understand that I didn't know before. So maybe critical thinking is the end skill that we're going to ask our education systems and ourselves to invest in.
My name is Leica, and I'm also from DuPont Manual High School. And my question to you is, do you think there's ever a point when society becomes so dependent upon the technology that we have where we just stop asking why? And I think we've already gotten to a point where there's a lot of technology that we just accept to be parts of our lives. Do you think there's ever a point, I guess, of no return when we'll just accept it as it is, and there we so few people that actually ask why that innovation might actually be hindered?
I hope not. I mean, I think you certainly could paint scenarios that way. I hope not. I go back to my earlier view that, what's intrinsically good about people is that we're curious. The hashtag here is stay curious. I love that. Again, it's human to stay curious, to ask why. And I think most people have invested in technology because they wanted to figure out why not. So I'm a bit more. You can tell. I'm a optimistic kind of person. So I don't think that. But yeah, I certainly think. When you start to think about where technology can take you, you're outsourcing parts of your brain. I mean, as someone who's getting a little older, the fact that I don't have to remember everything, that I can Google it, is really good. I don't have to ask why on some things. I can just do it. So yeah, I think there's going to be a balance. I don't know, Drake. How do you answer that one? You cover technology.
Well, I think that again, if there's a need for something, there's also a market for it, right? Like that's sort of the promise of capitalism. And so I think as people want to redefine their relationship for things, not only is there going to be an app for that, but there's going to be books for that. There's going to be classes for that. If you can identify like a pain point that's just sort of lying latent in people's lives and address that, either as a thinker, as a technologist, whatever way you interact with the world, like that can be your path.
Thank you.
Beth, Michael Dees. My father-in-law was a retiree and lifelong employee with GE out at Appliance Park. 3 simple questions. If you had the absolute golden goose of technology that could save every single household in America pulling energy and conserving energy off the grid, number 1, where would you start at GE? Number 2, where is your office? And number 3, how do I get on your calendar?
I'm guessing from those questions that you have the answer to those 3 questions. I'll make sure to exchange cards with you, but a couple of things. We've opened an office that is open for business with startups and entrepreneurs with ideas. It's in Menlo Park, so that is something we've set up. Obviously, we have a great team, some of the folks here from GE Appliances, but I'm happy to connect with you. But we do want to be more open for business with startups and people with ideas. It can be daunting. That's why I always say to startups that I get to interact with, it can be daunting when you look at a company like ours. What door do I go in? How do I align myself? How do I get somebody? And so increasingly, we found it important to create those kind of people who make sure that they know where the ideas are, they can connect them with the right team in the company. So we felt important to invest in those resources.
Okay, my name is Jimin Kim. I'm also from DuPont Manual. While you were talking about how all this science and how you can combine software and hardware, I was thinking about, I was talking with this one professor at the University of Louisville who was using nanogold particles to to combat cancer cells. And I was thinking about like how we can apply software to that. But throughout your talk and your discussions, you were talking about how scientists can come and help marketers, but how do you think you as a marketer and how all this combination of science and software and hardware, how this will affect you in the economical world?
Yeah, to me, it's where I kind of ended my talk. I think a marketer's perspective of how you think about technology is what's the benefit, what's the outcome. You know, if you're a healthcare scientist, you're driven, you're a marketer too, right? You're driven for an outcome. You want to save a life. What's the outcome? Sometimes I find in technology circles, if you're not careful, you can get carried away with let's do it because we can. And you always have to tether yourself. Drake said it, what's the need? What's the pain point? And I'd like to think that people who've been on that kind of journey, whether you're a designer or a marketer, you start from that perspective of what's the need. Let's make sure we channel that technology so that and look, sometimes there's technology that you don't know what the outcome is. You just are doing it because you can and you need to. So both are important, but I'm a big believer on tethering it to the need that's out there.
Hi, my name is David Hempy. I'm from Kentucky, a state that kicks ass, in case you didn't know that.
I'm very impressed with this state. It's amazing. And Louisville in particular, there's a great energy here.
Thank you. So as we embark into the Internet of Things and our cell phones are talking to our TVs and our GE refrigerators, this is great. And you referenced the balance between how much of that is useful and how much of that is just kind of cool and how much of that just because we can do. I'm interested in your perspective on the privacy side of things. We've got devices in every room of our house that have the potential to monitor things we're doing and are connected to the internet. We've talked yesterday with one of the other speakers about security and even international interest in hacking. How do we weigh that into whether our TV can talk to our refrigerator, can talk to our insurance company, and what do we do as consumers to make sure we're doing it responsibly?
Yeah, and I think you need to weigh the benefits in everything, the benefits that you get out of it. I think in most of these situations, already you're seeing architecture starting to be developed, standards, where people are always going to have an opt-in, hopefully have an opt-in or an opt-out. My experience has been I've spent a lot of time on the media side and in looking at healthcare. And you know, I found on healthcare privacy critically important that we protect our healthcare privacy. Yet many people voluntarily give up a lot of personal data about themselves because they want to get better. Sometimes it's just because what they experience they've been, they want to make sure no one else goes through it and they want someone else to be better. So I find that sometimes the data, again, if you have some control over it, you have the ability to decide what's the value. Some of those issues are much easier to solve, but look, we've got a long way to go as society and industry. I think you're starting to see as this industrial internet concept comes together, a lot of work looking at privacy and security issues. Do we have the right opt-in controls that people have a sense? I think you need to understand what's the value to begin with, and then you can start to put the right architecture. But there are a lot of industry groups that work on that right now.
Fantastic. I think that's all of our time.